Chuck Russell says, honest question, myopic vision, is this a new phenomenon or has it always been around? Question mark. Speaking in reference to so many caustic reactions when one person offers a different opinion on their own, is honest debate dying? It sure seems that way. I think we only have our own lives to measure first-person experiences, anecdotal experiences with. But this is why reading history is so lovely. There is, in my mind, absolutely no question that things are infinitely more toxic than they were when I was a kid growing up in the 70s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. Infinitely more toxic, infinitely more isolated, people becoming outraged when they hear an opinion that differs from them. The country's been at political war for 20 years, but I think there's something even deeper than that. When I was growing up, and right up until the invention, really, of the internet, these things happened more or less at the same time in the big scheme of things. But look, back in the 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and into the 90s, we had a uniform American media culture. Everybody listened to the same news. Well, one of three, but they were all the same thing, right? Everybody watched the same TV. We all watched Cheers, and we watched MASH, and we watched Mork and Mindy, and we listened to either the ABC Evening News or the NBC Evening News or the CBS Evening News, and we all got more or less the same information. It was slanted to the left, but it wasn't so slanted to the left as MSNBC is, and it wasn't nearly as conservative as Fox News is or used to be. And so as all these information outlets multiplied and as our choices increased, people begin to make choices that reinforce the choices that they've already made. People become comfortable with hearing what they already believe. And so it accelerates these opinions and it intensifies them, and it makes people less tolerant to hear other people's point of view. Now, this is much, much worse for the left than it is for the right. And it's not because we're better people, although we are. It's because we have to listen to the left. The pop culture swims in liberalism and leftism. We get the left's opinion every day. We know what they believe. We know why they believe it. We get to hear them all the time, every single time that Stephen Colbert or Jimmy Fallon open their mouths as so-called hosts of so-called late-night talk shows. They're MSNBC hosts. These guys. They're far left. They're far left entertainers. But back in the day, you could watch the Johnny Carson show and you wouldn't know whether Johnny was a Republican or a Democrat. I mean, Johnny Carson made fun of who was in office and was also nice to presidents on both sides. I mean, Johnny Carson was part of an America that had a much stronger middle of the culture before everything kind of got fractured. So people are in their own little echo chambers and hearing what they want to hear. And look, we do this too. Then I just chuck in something here. I know I got asked if I wanted to. I got asked by PJTV. They said, here's how it worked. They said, we've got an interview lined up with Larry Flynt. Do you want to do it? And I said, yeah, I want to do it. Definitely I want to do it. I don't like doing interviews generally, and I don't do a lot of them, as you probably know by now. But it's like, yeah, sure, I definitely want to do it. And the reason I wanted to do it was twofold. I wanted to do it because there were a lot of things I don't like about Larry Flynt, and because there's one or two things I do like about Larry Flynt. And if you saw the interview, you know it was there, so I'm not going to make this about Larry Flynt or how it came about. But I got a lot of friendly fire for that, like, this is beneath you, and you can do so much better than this. It's almost like people just assumed that I was printing Hustler magazine and that I was this guy, when all I did was ask him some questions that I thought rather pointed ones. Now, he was pretty prickly when we first got in there, so you have to, in any interview, it doesn't matter who you are or who you're interviewing, you always have to set up a sense of camaraderie if you're going to get the person to talk about anything interesting at all. So I opened with some softball questions because, frankly, his office did surprise me. His office, I didn't say this on camera, his office looks like a Viennese whorehouse, frankly. But it is filled with classical Western art, and it's filled with very romantic art. Excuse me. And it's shocking. It's just shocking to walk into that office and see, these wall-sized classical Renaissance pictures. And and then and these wood desks and these beautiful Roman and Grecian statues of women, and then on his desk are like the latest issues of the kind of like the worst kind of porn. But a lot of people just gave me a lot of grief about it, like it was like I had done the publishing. Now, there's a lot about Larry Flynt that I don't like, but there's a lot about him that I did like, and he is an example of somebody who not only stands up for free speech when it's his free speech under fire, but he's one of the very few people in the publishing business, very few people of any name at all, who stands up for free speech when it's other people who are under attack for free speech. When Charlie Hebdo got shot up, Gary Trudeau, a cartoonist, basically said, well, they deserved it. They kind of deserve to get killed. That's what you get for provoking this religion of peace. And Flynt was right in front of that. So, he was being, this is ridiculous. It's absurd. He struck me as a guy who had a lot of courage, and he had a lot of integrity on issues that I think are important. And I think, look, assault of freedom of speech, the assault of the ability to disagree is the number one fear I have in this country, is this politically correct thought police enforcement with the law behind them now. It just terrifies me. So in that regard, I think he's a hero. There's a lot of things I think he does that are reprehensible. I liked him. I thought he was a lot softer and nicer than I thought he would be. And I don't think I was particularly easy on him. I mean, he's one of these people that thinks, he's one of these people that thinks that, oh, Hillary now is just a little oversight. I read him the statute. But the point I'm trying to make here is it does actually go to the question, because occasionally on this show I will actually say something that's, referencing the actual question. When these echo chambers, and because of the fracturing of the information sources, the people get to watch a Stratosphere Lounge. Look, if you watch the show, generally it's because you have the same values that I do, and I think it's terrific. I think it's great. But you'd never be able to see me if this were CBS TV and some guy just talking for 2.5 hours. There's not a chance in the world. But what I'm trying to say here is we can be as guilty of this as anybody else. This nothing demoralizes me personally more than these kind of friendly fire attacks. This is, you're better than this, and this is beneath you, or I'm canceling my PJTV membership. The guy has got he's a really deep and interesting guy, and you really probably had to be there to understand that he's actually a very kind of a soft guy, and whether you think that mitigates what he does or not is not really important. What is important is he has stood up for some fundamental principles that I agree with, and to the degree that he does that, that's admirable, because there are people who I do admire or did admire who don't. When Bill O'Reilly, I think it was O'Reilly, basically says, this Garland thing, they're poking people with a stick. He's basically saying you deserve to get killed for freedom of speech, and it's like, I don't know what to say about that. Yeah, I thought anyway, I think a little more tolerance would be a good thing. And tolerance doesn't mean acceptance, by the way, right? You don't have to accept it. You don't have to like it. You don't have to agree with it. You just have to listen to it. And I actually spent a little time with this woman who's not just a liberal, but I mean, just got kind of thrown into a bin with somebody, and a chance to talk to somebody in a waiting room for a while. And I mean, I know it's almost like a cartoon, but I mean, this person is like super, super progressive member of the Occupy Wall Street movement, all this other stuff. I'm listening to all this other stuff. And by the way, believes in 9/11 was an inside job, and chemtrails, and moon landing was probably faked. And I would ask questions. I'd say, do you remember when the Trade Center fell? Yes. Do you remember on the ground and at Ground Zero after it was over, the outside facade of the building was came down like a bunch of forks stuck in the ground because of the way the outside of the building, which was kind of a load-bearing structure. Yes. So did you ever see a picture of the top of World Trade Center number 7? That's their big evidence. World Trade Center number 7 just collapses on its own. It's like those giant forks that were stuck in the ground cut World Trade Center building number 7 in half. It was burning for 5 hours before it collapsed. It had been cut in half by the fact that the 2 tallest buildings in the world at one point fell on top of it. And this is your entire theory is based on this? And she didn't have an answer. And I told her about the guy who was conducting the funeral service for my dad, who watched that jet go over his head as it hit the Pentagon. And I said, was he in on this conspiracy? Shrug your shoulders. What about all the people driving on the freeway that saw the plane hit? How do you get them in on the conspiracy? No answer. Chemtrails, this idea that people are that the government is dropping poison, that these jet contrails are poison trails that are used to control the population. She fervently believes in this, and I said, I'm a pilot. How does this work? What do you mean, how does it work? Well, I mean, are these chemicals coming out of commercial jets? I don't know. Well, they better be coming out of commercial jets, because if there are as many jets flying around at altitude up there that are black jets owned by the CIA, then every single air traffic controller in the universe has to be in on this, not to mention all the ground crews and everything. Yeah, I guess it's coming from the commercial airliners. Well, why would a pilot do that? What do you mean? Why would a pilot do it? Why would a pilot do it? Why would he gas his own people down there? Well, maybe they don't know about it. Listen, sweetheart, pilots walk around airplanes as a matter of course before every single time they take off. If there are things in the engines that are spraying stuff out into the jet stream, they're going to know about it, and the mechanics are going to know about it, and everybody's going to know about it. Oh, well, the government's paying them a big sums of money, hundreds of $1,000s, to be quiet about it, and if they start talking, they're going to come after their children. You get to vote? You get to vote? Really? So, I don't know. I listen to this stuff. I need to know it, and I don't bear that person any personal ill will. They literally believe they can teleport themselves and dematerialize themselves. That's fine. I don't care. But what you do realize is that they do vote, and they vote about things. If they vote about things like chemtrails and moon landing being faked and 9/11 being an inside job, and when you confront them with it, see, here's the thing about the 9/11 thing, just as an example, or chemtrails as well. Here's the thing I run into all the time with these people. They've got these theories, right? And when you confront them with these theories, like who maintains these chemical sprayers, and when they come in and land and new poisons are loaded, who loads them? I don't know. Well, you don't get to say, I don't know. You have to know. You have to know. When you say, have you ever seen, well, the World Trade Center was brought down by internal, was imploded with explosives. Well, in order to prep a building to bring down even a small building is months. It takes months of putting these explosives into the steel beams with all the det cord running out. It takes months and months and months and months and months. So since the World Trade Center is open 24/7, why didn't anybody come into work that morning and say, hey, what are all these det cords doing in our office building structures? Well, I don't know. You don't get to say, I don't know. The fact that you can't answer the question means your theory is wrong. My theory is 19 Islamic savages hijacked 4 airplanes and flew them into buildings. And the reason that's my theory is because I saw it with my own eyes. There's nothing inconsistent about it. There's no part of this equation I can't answer. How did they fly the airplanes then? They flew the airplanes because we have pictures of them in flight school. We have their names. We have their addresses. We know where they studied, when they studied. We knew they wanted to fly just jets. We knew they didn't want to learn how to take off a jet or land a jet. They just flew the jets. That's all they trained for. My theory doesn't require any leaps of faith, and I don't get to roll my eyes, and I don't have to say no. I don't know why. No. WT7 fell because it was cut in half by debris from the World Trade Center. It burned for 5 hours, and then like any other building that had been through that kind of nightmare, it collapsed. There's nothing magical here, and there's no giant leaps of logic. You have to explain, well, how come that nobody saw this missile since you've never seen an airplane disintegrate? I show you a picture if you'd like. You can go on YouTube and see a picture of an F-4 Phantom on a rocket sled going into a concrete wall that's something like 60 feet thick, and this is a big airplane, an F-4 Phantom II, big airplane. And as that airplane hits that rocket sled in slow motion, you can see the airplane turn to dust. Dust. It turns to dust because airplanes are hollow. Because if they were solid, they wouldn't fly. And that's why the only parts of the airplane that they can actually find after a serious crash is almost always all you get are either the hard part of the landing gear or the engine core, which are pretty much solid titanium. Everything else is just aluminum. It just vaporizes. And that's what they found in the Pentagon, and that's what they found in the hole in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. I don't need anything to make my theory work. And when they can't answer the question about well, where was the det cord, or who's refueling these things? Well, I don't know. You don't get to say I don't know. Your theory's wrong. You have to have an answer for this theory. Occam's razor says I win. The simple explanation is the simple explanation. By the way, for those of you who may still have some doubts about this, there's this tiny little aviation diversion, or much more likely for those of you who have to encounter these people. You'll hear them say, no, there used to be contrails, but now there are chemtrails. When I was a kid growing up, a contrail was a tiny little streak, and it was very thin, and it dissipated right behind the airplane. And you can occasionally see those contrails today. And they'll say, here's a picture of a contrail. This is a picture of a chemtrail. Okay. It's true that airplanes do not leave the same kind of markings in the sky that they left in the 50s and 60s and up through the 70s. By the time we got into the 80s, it started to change. And for those of you who are interested in these kind of things, who run into one of these lunatics who have no other explanation for this, let me just very briefly explain something to you. Starting with the 747, I want to say, the design of jet engines changed, and they became far more efficient, and they became considerably quieter. They transferred into something called a high bypass jet engine. So since I love talking about this stuff, let me tell you what a jet engine used to be. A jet engine was essentially, still is, a turbine. It's like a fan, a turbine at the front. And if you look at the early jet engines, if you look at the nacelles, the things that hold the engine on a 707, the first successful commercial jetliner, DC-8, DC-9, 727, and the early first model 737s, you'll find the jet engine is actually pretty narrow and pretty long. That's because it's essentially a straight turbojet. It's a turbojet engine. What does that mean? That means that in the early jet engines, the opening of the engine where the fan spins, it meant that all of the air that's doing anything to push the airplane is going through the engine. It's going right through the engine core. So, and that makes sense, right? Great. So basically, on a 707 or a DC-8 or a MD or DC-9 or a DC-8, whatever, any of the old jets that used to leave those little thin contrails, all of the air was going through the jet engine. The engine sucked the air in, and it spit it out at high speed out the back end, and that makes a pretty small, pretty narrow little wake. A contrail is just condensation. That's where the word contrail comes from. It's condensed. It's water vapor is heated, and then it freezes in those very high temperatures in the stratosphere, leaves a little ice trail, and then the ice usually just sublimates back out into the air. That's a high bypass, a low bypass traditional turbo jet. Starting with the 747, I want to say they realized that there was a way to get more power, less noise, and more fuel efficiency out of a jet engine. Hooray! And that's what became a turbofan engine. If you look at any single airplane that you're likely to fly on today, I can't think of an exception to this. If you stand in front of it at the jetway and you look at the 737 or Airbus that you're about to get on, or whatever the case may be, you will see that the engines are much wider than they used to be, and they're not as long. And the reason they're much wider is because a good way to think about them is they're not really pure jets in the way that the old jet engines were. They are, in fact, propeller airplanes. They're propellers that instead of having 4 blades, they've got a fan that may have 30 or 40 blades. It's called a turbofan engine. What happens in a turbofan engine is, yes, air still comes through the front, and yes, air still goes into the jet engine intake. That's why it's a jet engine. And once it gets inside, the air is compressed and then squirted with oxygen, with fuel. And because the air is compressed, it's carrying a much higher oxygen density. and that fiery blast comes out of the back of the engine, and it provides thrust, that's true, but what it's mostly doing is it's spinning a turbine on the back of the engine, and that turbine is running a shaft that runs through the engine to spin the much, much, much bigger turbine out front. So basically, you've got a jet engine turning a big fan. Instead of it just being pure jet thrust coming out the back, some of it's jet thrust, but the vast majority of the energy is essentially just spinning a fan, which is a 30, 40 bladed propeller. They're essentially jet-powered propeller airplanes. It's what modern commercial jetliners use. And because they're taking in a much bigger volume of air, a much bigger volume, instead of this little tiny little bit of hot air that goes just out through the thing, they're taking in a much larger version of air that comes around the hot core. So it's a big, huge volume. And basically, you're multiplying the volume of air that gets warmed and pushed back by, I don't know what the factor is, 10 probably, something like that. Okay? So jet engine design changed, and they leave different contrails now because they're moving much more volumes of air are being heated than used to be heated before. Close to say, used to be that a small volume of air was accelerated very quickly, and now a much larger volume of air is accelerated less quickly. But they produce a tremendously larger plume of heated air, and that's why the contrails are more persistent than they used to be. Sometimes I just don't know. So, yes, we do need to listen to other people. I listen to people talk about chemtrails, and it's not so easy to defeat. I listen to people talk about the Loch Ness Monster. I hear people talk about 9/11 being an inside job. I hear people talk about faking the moon landing, and then I tell them that building a TV studio in a full vacuum is harder than going to the moon. That's ridiculous, is it? You ever... it's just Captain Simple Science here. I wish, God. Here, this may work. Hang on a second. Okay, watch carefully. Here's why your moon landing couldn't happen on a soundstage. Now watch. Okay, what just happened there in that magical feat of engineering? I made an extremely small pressure difference, very small pressure difference by sucking the air out of that bottle of water. I reduced the air pressure inside that bottle. I didn't reduce it to zero or anything like zero. I just reduced it a little bit. So why did it crunch up? Did I suck all the support out of the plastic? No. No. By just sucking a little bit of air out of the top of this plastic bottle, the bottle got crushed because all the air around it crushed it. We do not realize that we're living at the bottom of an ocean of air that exerts thousands of, well, I don't know what the exact air, 15 pounds per square inch, I don't know what it is, on sea level. But the point is that air is pushing down on everything all the time. And the reason that this bottle looks normal right now is because, yes, there's an enormous amount of pressure on the outside pushing in, but the air pressure on the inside is the same pushing out. Here is a piece of paper, right? It should be easy for me to punch my finger through the paper, and it is, unless I've got my finger on the other side of the paper, in which case it's impossible to punch my finger through the paper because the pressure on both sides are equal. So, if you imagine this water bottle now, and instead of just me going, like, sucking just a little bit of the air out of there, if I took all the air out of that bottle would be crushed all the way down to next to nothing, right? Because all of the surrounding air pressure would reduce this bottle and press on it in one side. Thank you very much, Foghorn. It's 14.1 psi at sea level on a standard day. That's what I get for having people know what they're talking about sitting in my audience. All right, so you with me? So if it's what it does to a little bottle, right? If it does this to a bottle, what would it do to a structure the size of a TV studio? You can't just shoot it in a hangar, you know. You can't pump the air out of a hangar. You can't. And the air has to be pumped out of a hangar, not because of the gravity. It does nothing to do with the gravity. The evidence for the moon landing is in every single piece of video ever taken of the moon landing. Anytime you watch an astronaut walk on the moon, you look at his feet. Look at his feet. This is fine-grained dust. In an atmosphere, that dust would make a dust cloud. There's no dust clouds on the moon. Watch the dust on a lunar mission. It doesn't even have to be with a rover. Watch the feet. The dust goes out in little sprays like water because that's how dust behaves in a vacuum. And you, as an engineer told me, it is much, much, much easier to go to the moon than it is to make a soundstage into a perfect vacuum. So we listen to their points of view. Did they ever listen to ours? No, they just don't.